Henry the Green Engine was sent to Crovan's Gate to pick up a special item for the Culdee Railway. He wondered what it was. He arrived at the works and looked around for the item. "Good morning, Henry," said the manager. "Looking for your load?"
"Yes, I am,"
replied Henry. "Over here, mate," said a voice. Henry jumped. Beside him was a little black diesel.
Hello, are you that special item?"
he inquired. "Why, yes," replied the diesel. "I'm the first diesel for the Culdee Railway. My real name's Niles, but they nickname me the Mouse because I, look like a little black mouse." Henry laughed.
"Come on, Niles, let's get you to your railway."
When Niles was loaded onto the track at Kirk Matcham, the other engines were quite amazed. They had never had a diesel on their railway before. "Welcome, number 9, said Ernest, the oldest of the lot.
"Hello, Niles,"
said Mr. Buraine, the manager.
"Ernest, show him round."
Ernest took him to the carriage shed, where Jane the truck was sleeping.
"This is Jane, the maintenance truck," said Ernest. "You'll mostly be going out with her, being the maintenance diesel."
Jane woke suddenly to the sound of Niles' engine. "Phew!" she spluttered. "What is that racket?"
"I am sorry,"
said Niles. "I'm new here." "Oh, you're a new maintenance diesel. Oh, how rude of me. I'm just not used to the sound of diesel engines. Pleasure to meet you." The two began a conversation when Niles' driver came in. "Mr. Buraine requests that we double head a passenger train with Patrick. It'll show you the line."
"At last, real work,"
said Niles joyfully, and he roared into action. Patrick, who was previously known as Lord Harry, was waiting for Niles with a coach. Niles slowly backed down onto the front of the coach.
"What on earth are you doing?"
snapped Patrick.
"You can't pull the train from the front. It's not safe. Didn't you know that?"
"No, sorry, I'm new and—"
"Oh, just couple up behind me when I leave,"
interrupted Patrick.
"I'll teach you the ways of the mountain railway."
Patrick was very reluctant to share a train with a diesel. They always seemed very oily and noisy, and he had heard bad things about them from the mainline engines. The passengers boarded, the guard blew the whistle, and they set off. As they puffed through the countryside, they approached a crossing. Patrick gave a whistle to warn people. Niles decided to copy him. He blared his horn. "Ah!" screeched Patrick, who was utterly shaken by the strong noise.
"What is one loud horn?"
"Sorry, mate. I was just doing what you did," said Niles.
"Yes,"
grunted Patrick.
"How about you leave the whistling to me? Hey, mate."
They were soon climbing up Culdee Fell. Niles was astonished by the view.
"Keep your eyes on the rails,"
Patrick barked.
"I am,"
replied Niles. "Don't worry, everything is under control."
"Yeah, sure,"
muttered Patrick. Then they reached Devil's Back, the last and steep stretch to the summit.
"Careful, Mouthy,"
reported Patrick.
"Don't want to fall off here."
Niles only laughed. But just then they saw Culdee, who was not moving at all. A guard was waving a red flag, and Patrick and Niles had to stop. "Culdee's broken an axle. He's stuck," said the guard.
"Bother,"
said Patrick's driver. "How will we get to the summit? We can't pass you guys." "You're not the only one not going to the summit. These poor passengers are stuck," said Culdee. Patrick growled. Niles had an idea. He whispered it to his driver.
"Yes, of course. That'll work."
Niles then suddenly shot forward.
"What are you doing?"
yelled Patrick. Niles shunted Patrick and the coach gently into Culdee. "I can push you all up," said Niles.
"Absolute rubbish!"
snarled Patrick.
"You can't possibly push all of us straight up this mountain."
But the drivers all agreed, and Niles' engine roared into life.
"Good luck,"
scoffed Patrick. "You ready?" asked Niles' driver. "Yes, mate. Let's go." and with a bump, Niles pushed the train up the hill with no trouble at all. Patrick and Culdee were astonished. Niles wasn't going very fast, but managed to push the train all the way to the summit without any bother. The passengers were very impressed. "Well done, Niles," cheered Culdee. "Thank you so much." "Oh, it's nothing. It's what I'm designed for. I'm a maintenance diesel." That evening, Niles was resting in the shed when Patrick came in.
Listen, mate, I'm sorry I was rude to you. You definitely did surprise me with your strength.
Niles smiled. "It's all right, mate," he said. "I'm quite fascinated by how your steam engines work. You all are truly magnificent machines, especially you." Patrick felt very flattered and started going on and on about his design. Soon, the other engines came in, and the 8 were all telling Niles about their majestic railway. "You may look like a mouse," said Alaric, "but you're definitely not as quiet as one, and certainly more stronger." The engines all laughed. Niles could only agree. It was a very dismal day. There was no rain, but the dark clouds loomed ahead, and the wind blew fiercely. All passenger trains stopped at Devil's Back Station, but supplies trains continued on. Shane Dooney collected the guard's van and some trucks to take up to the summit. The trucks were a new addition to the railway, as Jane could not take large loads. The trucks were very troublesome, and the engines found them difficult.
Come on,
barked Shane.
get a move on.
No, no,
Screamed the trucks,
we won't.
but they were no match for Shane's strength. Shane picked up several goods along the line and met Niles and Jane at the middle station. "Careful, mate," said Niles. "The wind's pretty bad up here." "Too bad for me," grunted Jane. Shane chuckled.
I've been on this railway for quite a while, and I've experienced the worst kind of bad weather.
And with a bump, he forced the trucks up the steep slope. Niles was right about the wind. It wanted to blow Shane right off the mountain, but he wouldn't have it. With all his strength, he slowly made his way up the ridge.
Goodness,
he cried.
Mother Nature isn't very happy today.
At last, he reached the summit. Trash cans and umbrellas were blowing everywhere. The workmen unloaded the trucks, and the driver and fireman went to talk to the station manager. However, they forgot to apply Shane's brakes. Shane waited in the howling wind, eager to go home. Suddenly, a massive gust hit, and Shane found himself moving.
Driver,
he called.
Little help.
The trucks were delighted and gave a big bump, which sent Shane down the slope.
Help!
he cried. The driver and fireman raced towards him, but couldn't catch up. Shane approached a curve in the track and tried to apply his automatic brakes, but it was too late. He derailed and shut his eyes. He ran off the rails and continued on until he went over the edge. He hit something hard, and when he opened his eyes, he found himself dangling on a ledge. The trucks rolled down the mountain, smashing into pieces. It served them right. Shane had never been more terrified in his whole life.
Help!
he shouted. The wind blasted him, trying to push him over the edge. The driver and fireman were horrified. "Get the breakdown train, now!" The message was sent down to Kirk Matchin, and Niles immediately set off with the crane. However, Niles wasn't particularly fast, and the wind made him a lot slower. But he tried as hard as he could. "Come on, Jane! Shane's depending on us!" Shane was so scared that he wouldn't dare look down. Some bad memories came back to him. Godred's accident back in 1900 flashed before his eyes. The driver and fireman were yelling something, but the wind was so loud that Shane couldn't make out what they were saying. At last, Niles raced in with the crane, as fast as he could, which wasn't very fast at all. The workmen scrambled out, and some had to climb down with ropes to get where Shane was perched. "Are you sure this is going to work?" said Niles. "I don't think the rope's strong enough." It's our only chance, replied a workman, as he watched the others attach the chain to Shane Dooney.
If this doesn't work,
Said Shane to the workman,
tell Mr. Borain how honored I was to work for him.
Rubbish, said the workman. You'll get out of this, we promise. But Shane wasn't too sure. The chain was securely fastened, and the workmen all signaled to the top. All right, said the workman up above. Pull! The crane began to wind furiously. It pulled Shane up onto the cliff, straining as he slowly inched towards the top. Shane was shuddering and sweating as the wind howled across his boiler. Niles was sweating too. The men were all watching anxiously. Slowly, the top of the hill came closer and closer. To Shane, it seemed like ages. But suddenly, he realized he was at the top. His wheels slowly but firmly set onto the rails. Everyone cheered, and Shane Dooney had never felt so relieved in his entire life. Well done, Niles, cried Shane's driver. And well done, Shane, you brave engine.
Well, I had just gotten a washdown, chuckled Shane, so rolling down the mountain would never do.
Everyone laughed.
Still managed to find humor in a moment like this,
chuckled Niles. That night, the engines were very pleased to see their friend safe.
As a reward for your bravery, I think it's only fair that you get to take out the next tea train,
said Mr. Borain.
Thank you, sir, but may I ask what's happening to the trucks?
Mr. Borain laughed.
They are going straight to the rubbish bin. The workmen will go pick up their remains tomorrow.
But that's another story. The Fat Controller was having breakfast. He was eating toast and marmalade. The butler came in.
Excuse me, sir. You are wanted on the telephone.
Bother that telephone,
said the Fat Controller. But this time, it was good news.
Oh, he said, how lovely.
He returned to the dining room.
Well, what do you know, my dear? Mr. Borain has invited us on a special tea train up Culdee Fell. The thin and small controllers are also coming.
Meanwhile, at Kirk Matchin, the little purple engines were all observing a very fancy coach.
This is the coach for the tea train,
said Mr. Borain.
First-class style, all the way up Culdee Fell.
The engines were impressed. Who will be taking the first run? Asked Wilfred.
I rolled 2 dice this morning, and it landed on 6 and 2, which makes 8. Therefore, Eric, our number 8, will operate the first run.
Eric was very pleased.
Why, thank you, sir.
That night, he couldn't stop talking about it, much to the annoyance of the other engines.
Ah, the first engine to take the tea train with the 4 big railway controllers. I don't believe it. I haven't felt this excited in my whole life.
Yes, good for you,
scoffed Patrick. Eric's never talked this much, whispered Culdee to Ernest.
Oh, he's just excited, replied Ernest, and I would be too.
The next day, Eric finished his work and got the train all ready. He was extra careful with the coach as he came into the platform. The thin and small controllers were already there. They waited for the Fat Controller and Lady Hat to show up. The time ticked on. Eric was impatient.
Come on, he grumbled. We should have left by now.
I hope something didn't hold them up, said the driver. Just then, the Fat Controller's car rolled in. He stepped out, holding a takeout bag.
Sorry we're late. Had a few things to sort out, he said.
Soon, they were all aboard, and Eric set off. Mr. Borain set up the kettle, while the Fat Controller munched on his burger.
Gently, Eric. We're in no hurry, said Eric's driver. Don't worry. Everything is under control, said Eric.
Meanwhile, the controllers were all having a conversation about their railways.
Your railway's mainly for passengers,
said the thin controller to Mr. Borain.
A tourist railway, more like. My railway's an actual functioning railway, and so is the small railway.
What do you mean by functioning railway? Replied Mr. Borain. If you haven't noticed, we are on a running train right now.
I meant functioning as in supplying goods rather than just passengers. You know, like ballast or wool. Oh, yeah, true. I mean, we do have trucks and all that, but they're mainly for just railway maintenance. Of course, there are no quarries or coal mines at the summit of the highest mountain on Sodor.
Soon, Eric was making his way up the final descent. The controllers were all sipping their tea, enjoying the view.
Good Lord,
Said the small controller in awe.
never get this on your railway, eh, Topham?
The fat controller chuckled and was making his way back to the seat with the tea kettle when it happened. A sheep strayed onto the line. "Stop!" yelled Eric. The driver slammed on the brakes, and the fat controller lurched backwards. The tea kettle flew out of his hands, right through the coach, out the back window, and smashed on poor Eric's face. "Ouch!" shrieked Eric. The passengers all stepped out to see what had happened. The fat controller laughed.
Oh, how lovely. I see you've joined the tea party,
he chuckled. Eric snorted. He didn't think it was funny at all. His boiler was so hot that the tea solidified and cracked. Mr. Borain picked up the shards of the teapot, and they continued on to the summit. Whilst the controllers were all in the cafe, workmen tried very hard to scrub off the tea, but it was difficult because the boiler was very hot.
That clumsy buffoon,
Eric retorted.
holding us up to get a hamburger and then throwing things out the window. Despicable!
I'm sure it was an accident, said his driver.
He laughed at it. He took no responsibility for his actions,
grunted Eric. On the way down, things went more smoothly. Well, mostly. Everyone was eating a chocolate cake, but they had to act fast or the fat controller would gobble it up.
Topham, you'll make yourself sick,
said Lady Hat.
And us too,
laughed the small controller.
Nonsense, dear,
chuckled the fat controller.
This is Mr. Borain's special treat.
He walked over to the cake to get another slice when the train approached a crossing. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a lorry darted over the crossing and Eric slammed on the brakes. There was a squelching noise inside and a very loud
bother
from the fat controller. Back at Kirk Matchin, everyone cackled when the fat controller emerged. He was covered in thick, gooey chocolate cake.
I could be wrong, snickered Eric, but I think you're supposed to eat the cake, not wear it.
The fat controller laughed.
Yes, indeed. I'm sorry I spilt tea on you. I was being careless.
That's all right, sir, said Eric. We all have accidents. We just need to learn from them.
Right you are,
replied the fat controller, licking his fingers.
Well, I could say the first tea train was sort of a success,
said Mr. Brain.
Yes, indeed,
said the fat controller.
Thank you for inviting us. Now, if you excuse me, I better go find a bath.
Workmen had hiked up to Shane's accident site and were picking up what was salvageable of the trucks. I swear, every truck on this island must be suicidal, laughed one.
Well, I wouldn't like to be stuck if no engine was there to push me,
replied another. Suddenly, a workman shouted,
Look! I found something!
It was a rusty object. Upon closer inspection, it appeared to be an engine part. It was taken back to Kirk Matchin, where Mr. Borain inspected it. He looked at it, and then at the engines, and then back again.
What is it, sir?
asked Ernest.
There's only one engine that this could have come from,
he said ominously. He paused and stared at the engines with a blank expression.
Engines, almost 100 years later, we have found wreckage of Godred.
The year was 1900. The Culdee Fell Railway had just opened. There were 5 engines there at the time. Godred, Ernest, Wilfred, Culdee, and Shane Dooney. Godred, the number 1, was named after King Godred of Sodor, whom had reigned in the 1900s. He was very proud of this, which made him perhaps one of the most conceited engines the island had ever known. He was extremely reckless, often coming down the mountain at a tremendous speed. The other engines warned him, but he never listened. Eventually, his arrogance got the better of him. In July of 1900, shortly after the railway had opened, Godred was coming down the top slope being reckless as usual, when he suddenly derailed and rolled down the mountain. Miraculously, the coach stayed on the rails and the crew had jumped out. Godred, on the other hand, was practically wrecked and was never repaired. What happened next is the subject of debate, but it is agreed he was eventually scrapped. The 4 engines who were there at the time did not think the incident was a particularly fond memory. In fact, they never brought it up unless in the absolute need. The piece of wreckage that had now been found was truly shocking.
So, is it true that his pieces were used to mend you guys?
Asked Niles feebly.
No,
replied Ernest.
Here's the thing, Niles. He was in pieces when he was brought back.
Oh dear, shuddered Wilfred. Don't remind me of that.
What do you think we should do with it?
Said Eric.
I think we should place it in the back of the shed,
as a memory of our number 1, who tragically fell 98 years ago. And so they did. Placed above it was a plaque saying, "In memory of number 1, Godred, 1895 to 1900. The news soon spread quickly, and the next day reporters were already visiting the railway, taking pictures and notes. One reporter took pictures of all the engines. He was just about to leave, and was looking through the pictures on his camera, when he suddenly noticed something. He went over to Mr. Borain.
"Excuse me, sir. I think you better have a look at this."
Mr. Borain glanced at the photo, and immediately his eyes widened.
"What the devil is that?"
he said. There, on the side of the picture next to Eric, appeared to be an outline of another engine, but it was so faint it was hard to tell who it was. The picture soon went into the news and media. Everyone was very confused. I think what must have happened is another engine whizzed by while the picture was being taken, and because it was so fast, it wasn't fully developed in the photograph, said Culdee.
"Maybe,"
said Mr. Borain.
"I mean, normally I'd say he tampered with the photo with an editing program, but he discovered it right on his camera. I don't recall anyone puffing around the yard when it was being taken, though."
"It must have been the ghost," shivered Eric.
"Rubbish!" retorted Patrick. "There's no such thing."
"There's no evidence to prove that they don't exist," said Wilfred.
"Yet there's no scientific evidence to prove that they do exist," laughed Shane Dooney.
But even so, the engines all felt very uneasy. The next day, Wilfred stopped at Devil's Back Station on his way up to the summit. He saw another engine rolling down the steep line in the distance. "I wonder who that could be," he muttered to himself as he relaxed in the warm sunlight.
"Oh," replied his driver.
"Up there, that engine—" Wilfred suddenly realized that the engine had gone. It was nowhere to be seen. "What's it? I swear, I just saw an engine up there. Where did it go?" He was very confused. "You must have been seeing things," said the driver. "The last train ahead of us has already passed by." Wilfred, who didn't know what to think, started his journey to the summit. It was a fairly calm day. There was wind, but it was light and gentle. But Wilfred couldn't stop thinking about what he had seen earlier. Then suddenly, there was a loud crashing noise. Wilfred and his crew were startled, and they slammed on the brakes.
"What was that?"
the driver cried. He checked Wilfred first, then ran over to the ledge and peered over. But there was nothing there.
Was that an explosion?
Shouted the guard. "No," said Wilfred. "It's nothing with me, that's for sure." The crew checked all over the train to see if anything had happened, but everything was in perfect order. Everyone was very surprised and puzzled. So was Mr. Borain when he was told.
"There are some strange things going on right now," he declared. "I heard a train approaching the crossing this morning, but nothing came."
The engines, too, were very bemused. After the day's work was done, they talked about the events in the shed. "Something's not right," protested Culdee.
"Isn't it obvious?"
replied Alaric.
"There's some paranormal activity going around."
There was a long silence.
"The last time that word was used," said Ernest feebly, "was in 1950, on July 6.
50 years from Godred's accident, a group of hikers claimed to have seen an engine derail and roll down the mountain. But at the time, we were all in our shed, so there couldn't possibly have been an engine out. No wreckage was found either, and everyone was very confused. Eventually, they concluded that the hikers must have seen something like an animal, but no engine had fallen off.
"Do you think it was Godred?" asked Alaric. "We can't be too sure," replied Wilfred. The engines were all silent until Patrick spoke out.
"These events were most likely pure coincidences. I think we should all stop telling ghost stories and try to get some sleep."
"Good idea," replied Culdee. And the engines did. Night fell quickly, and all the drivers had gone home. Wilfred was sleeping soundly, until he was suddenly woken by hissing.
"Oh dear," he grumbled. "Who's playing about at this hour?"
He looked out, but could see no engine. Eric woke too, and he was cross.
"Shut up!" he barked. "It's far from dawn. Let an engine sleep."
But the hiss kept coming and coming. Slowly, the other engines began to awaken.
"Patrick, is that you?"
grunted Shane.
"How could that be me?"
snapped Patrick.
"Guys, it's coming from the outside," said Ernest. "Well," replied Alaric, "when whoever that is comes back in, I'll show him a thing or two."
Alaric, quivered Wilfred, how could it be one of us if all 8 of us are in the shed? There was a long silence. The engines all stared at each other in worry. Maybe it's a standard gauge engine, said Niles. Of course, duh, said Culdee. The engines were all relieved, until Ernest spoke. From all my years here, there has never been an engine running at this time of night. There just aren't any services past midnight on the Peel Godred branch. Wilfred was about to reply when they heard puffing noises. They got louder and louder and louder.
"All right, what's going on?"
yelled a voice. The engines jumped. It was only Mr. Borain, who had dashed in from his house. He froze when he realized all 8 engines were in the shed.
"We don't know what's going on, sir,"
said Ernest. The puffing noises started again, and Mr. Borain looked out. Suddenly, Mr. Borain exclaimed,
"There's something out there! I can see it puffing away! Come on, Wilfred, let's go find out who this hooligan is."
He immediately began building up Wilfred's fire, which did not take long to steam up because Wilfred was so frightened. Then Wilfred set off into the night. He could now see a plume of smoke in the distance. "I think it's Godred," cried Wilfred.
"I'm not gonna let Godred lurk around this railway,"
roared Mr. Borain.
"Full steam ahead!"
Then they approached a crossing. The object seemed to suddenly screech to a halt, barely avoiding an accident. There, grumbling as usual, was George the steamroller.
"Idiots!"
he grumbled. Mr. Borain felt foolish.
"Oh dear, I am sorry," he chuckled.
"Our fault,"
said George's driver.
"Didn't give a whistle. We were doing some road work at night because it would interfere with the traffic during the day. The gas-powered roller broke down, so they had to borrow us. Sorry about that. Thought we'd let you know."
"Well," replied Wilfred, "that solves the mystery. But what about the other events that happened recently?" Mr. Borain thought for a minute.
"I don't know, Wilfred. I just don't know. However, regardless, I think we need to put Godred's wreckage back where it was found."
Wilfred could only agree. They reached the site of Godred's accident just as dawn was breaking. Mr. Borain threw the piece down the mountain, where it rolled down, just like Godred. Wilfred stared out into the valley.
"If you're here, Godred," he said, "we're sorry to have disturbed you.
Mr. Borain climbed into Wilfred's cab.
Oh, and also,
Added Wilfred, ominously.
you are forgiven. We forgive you for your reckless behavior. Now we will leave you in peace.
And with that, he set off for home. After that, there were no other reports of strange activity. The engines still to this day don't know what happened, but they all agree that some things are better left unexplained.